this video, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about monopolies and how we can go about measuring and understanding how much market power a monopolist might have, and talk a little bit about how we tend to regulate monopolists, what we can do about a monopolist if we have one. So to start off with, we have to have this concept out of the way. A monopolist is going to have a downward sloping average revenue curve, which turns out to be the market demand curve, and a downward sloping marginal revenue curve. And beyond that, a monopolist is just like a firm in perfect competition when we analyze its behavior. We have a marginal cost curve. We find the point where MR equals MC. We label the quantity associated with that as QM, the monopoly's quantity. And then to find the price, we have to go back up to our demand curve to find out what price goes with QM. We call that price PM. Let's overlay an average total cost curve, and the difference between the average total cost and the difference between the average total cost and the price is going to be the profit. So the shaded area here on the screen is the profit. And we have a tool we use for measuring how much market power a monopolist has. We call it the price to marginal cost ratio. So if I were to ever ask you to calculate the price to marginal cost ratio, you just take the price and the marginal cost and you divide them. The first thing I hope you notice real quickly is that if we had a firm operating in perfect competition, in that case, the price is the marginal revenue, and the firm's going to set MR equal to MC. So with perfect competition, this number is 1. So with a monopolist, it's going to be a number bigger than 1, and the bigger that number, the more market power the monopolist has. So let's do an example. Here is our diagram with just the marginal cost and marginal revenue curve on it. MR equals MC to get the quantity. Off of that quantity, we get a price. And we can also take a look at where MR equals MC to calculate the marginal cost for our monopolist. And in this example here, we're going to say that the price is 12 and the marginal cost is 2. So the price to marginal cost ratio is just a matter of doing 12 divided by 2, and I think that should be 6, right? So that's the price to marginal cost ratio. Here is a different monopolist, and what I want you to notice is this monopolist has a very, very flat demand curve. So relative to the one on the previous slide, this demand curve is a lot more elastic, and that's really important. That's going to tell us a lot about our market power. So here's where MR equals MC, so the golden rule tells us this is the quantity we're going to get. We go to the demand curve to get the price, and so we end up with a monopoly price of 4 and a marginal cost of 2. So the price to marginal cost ratio is just 4 over 2, which should be 2 if I'm doing the math right. Feel free to double check my math anytime you like. And if you were to just take a quick look back at the previous slide and look at this slide, the main thing that's different here is how steep our demand curve is. And the thing we use to measure the relative steepness of a demand curve is the elasticity of demand. If the demand curve is very, very steep, relatively steep, we would consider it inelastic. If it's really flat or relatively flat, we would consider the demand elastic. So when the demand is inelastic, as on the previous slide, the monopolist has more market power. The only thing that gives the monopolist market power is the inability of the consumer to walk away from the product when the price goes up. Because when demand is inelastic, the consumer is either unable or unwilling to adjust their consumption by a large amount when prices change. Because of that, we end up getting a monopolist with lots of market power. Let me give you an example. Let's imagine that you have been injured in an automobile accident, and you are in the emergency room, and you are unconscious, and they're going to put an IV in, and the IV is just basically saline solution, and they can use it to put medicine into the bag and stuff like that as well. If this economist, last name of Perloff, back in 2004, it's been a while, but the example is still relevant, and if I find updated numbers on these, I will be posting them online as well. Basically, the hospitals that this person studied were charging just shy of $45 for a bag of saline solution. There was an 81-cent marginal cost. The price to marginal cost ratio is 55.4. You can kind of think about that as a 550% markup. Why is that? Real simple. You're laying on a hospital bed. You're in no shape to negotiate. You have no reasonable substitutes, no close substitutes. You can't walk away. Literally, you might not be able to walk away. You're not going to ask what the price to marginal cost ratio is. You're not going to shop around. If you need crutches and you need the rubber tips to go on the end of the crutch, it doesn't matter that they're $16 and the marginal cost is only 71 cents and you're basically being hit with a 220% markup. You're going to get them. That's just the way it is, because the demand for healthcare is going to be inelastic. You kind of have to buy it no matter what the situation is. If you need it, you really just need it. Things like this are needs, and needs tend to have very inelastic demands. An esophagus tube, I have no idea what that's used for, but it's going to cost you $1,200, or rather your insurance company $1,200. But it only costs the hospital, the marginal cost is $150, and there's a pretty hefty markup on those things. Why? Because the market power is there and the demand's very inelastic. So how do we deal with monopolies? Well, we tend to kind of regulate them by a lot of different ways. The first thing is patents. Patents are with a patent, we temporarily grant monopoly rights. This is done so that the company that did the research to earn the patent can then capture profits from their research and development, and the patent is there to protect them so they can maintain their intellectual property rights and profit from their research and development. A lot of people hate on big ag businesses like monopolies, or like Monsanto, because they have a monopoly and a patent on genetically modified crops, but they put money into it. They deserve the right to get their money back out of it, and then the patent ensures that they can do that. Many economists have argued that we would not have any innovation in our society if it weren't for the patents that protect intellectual property and grant temporary monopoly rights so that people can extract monopoly rents. Another thing we do is divestiture. This happened with Standard Oil. You've heard of Rockefeller. He was an oil guy. He made tons of money by capturing by getting a monopoly in the oil market when the oil market was kind of a new thing, really. And what was done is our government just basically took his company and split it up into several different companies. We call that divestiture. That's one thing we can do with it. It's very common to have monopolies owned and controlled by the government. For example, I get my power from Murfreesboro Electric. Murfreesboro Electric is a branch of city government, and so the government owns the power distribution inside of Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and therefore it's not a for-profit company running it, and so they don't really have a profit incentive when pricing, and you get a price that's not what a monopolist would charge. In some situations, we allow private companies to run the power and dictate to them what they can charge for electricity. And that happens as well. We'll talk about that with the rate of return regulation here in a second. Cooperatives are a way that we regulate monopolies. So a cooperative is basically a business that's owned by its customers. If you live in Rutherford County but not in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, you're getting your power from Middle Tennessee Electric Membership Cooperative. And if you get your power from that cooperative, you technically own that cooperative. You get to vote on the board of directors and things like that. You basically own stock in that electricity cooperative. And because you own the cooperative, you in theory are going to profit from any profit the cooperative makes. And so this idea that the cooperative is somehow creating dead weight loss disappears because you own the cooperative, and so the extra profits are yours, in theory, of course. And then rate of return regulation. This pops up when we have private companies that are profit motivated in charge of things like public utilities. And there are two basic ways we can do this. We can tell the monopolists they're allowed to operate, but they've got to operate at the break-even point. Or we can tell the monopolists they have to behave as if they were a firm operating in perfect competition. We need a graph to see this, so we're going to hit the next slide and pull up a graph. So here's the next slide, and here is the typical situation with a monopolist. We look for MR equals MC. We use that to determine QM. Go up to the demand curve. We have to consult the demander here, right? And at that quantity QM, the demander is willing to pay PM in order to clear the market of that quantity, and that gives us our standard monopoly diagram. Now we ask the question, what would happen if this were a perfectly competitive market? Well, if this were a perfectly competitive market, we would use the point where supply equals demand in order to determine the price. Well, that's a problem because there's no supply curve here. We have a demand curve here, but there's no supply curve. Now, what I'm really hoping is that as I'm saying that, you're going, wait, Dr. Gardner, there is a supply curve on this diagram because we know that the marginal cost curve is the supply curve. So supply meets demand where MC crosses demand. That is here. We're going to call that P star and Q star, where P and Q stands for the most optimal choice because there's no deadweight loss when we have perfect competition. What I want you to notice, though, at this point is P star is above the average total cost curve at Q star. So if you follow Q star up, it'll cross the yellow dotted line that's labeled average total cost. The monopolist is still earning a profit at this price. They're earning less profit than they would if they were allowed to behave like a monopolist, but we're not choking out this monopolist so it can't make any money. Now, we can do that. We can't go beyond that point because if we go beyond the point where we choke the monopolist out, they're just going to go out of business. They're not going to provide the product. And so our next thing is we got to find the break-even point. Well, at the break-even point, our costs are exactly equal to our revenue. Where does that happen at? That happens right here. I'm going to label that P0 and Q0, where the 0 stands for the amount of profit the monopolist makes. Where the average total cost curve crosses the demand curve, our monopolist is going to break even. If I were you, I would write that down. Anytime the price is above the average total cost, the monopolist is going to make a profit. When ATC crosses the average revenue curve, which is, again, our demand curve here, our monopolist breaks even. I'm thinking that sounds like the answer to a test question to me. This slide looks like a real important thing. And it's the last slide, and so this is a good chance for you to kind of rewind the video and redraw the diagram and kind of see for yourself where these points are and see if you can figure out on your own by drawing the diagram. You should always draw these when I put them up on the screen. It's good for you to draw them. So rewind it and draw this out. It will be good for you and it'll be good for your grade if you'll do it. Kind of try to understand that, at P star and Q star, this particular monopolist here is making a profit, right? And they only lose money if we go out further than Q0. If we keep going out to the right, where the average total cost curve is above the average revenue curve, then the monopolist is going to lose money. But over on the left, where the average revenue curve is above the average total cost curve, the monopolist is going to have a positive profit. Anyways, I think I've droned on long enough. Thank you very much for listening.